These are 10 more things you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin. First, starting with the Boston Celtics' only weakness. The Celtics have drawn plenty of attention this season for their relentless three-point shooting, launching nearly 48 attempts per game, the most in the league. While that approach has fueled their success, it hasn't been without its challenges. From mid-December through to January, Boston hit a rough patch, going just 10-9 over a 19-game stretch. They've since bounced back though, winning 7 of their last 8 heading into the All-Star break. But that slump raised some questions. As the reigning champions, they are getting every team's best shot, making even the so-called easy games tougher ones. One consistent in their game plan over this time though has been the 3-ball. They've experimented with different lineups, including a double big look, but their reliance on deep shots remains. Some argue if it's working, why change it? But is this truly the best version of the Celtics? Earlier in the season, I made a video talking about how Boston could potentially be an even better team if they just cut down on some of the unnecessary threes and attack the basket more often. They have the size and ball handling across positions to be one of the best driving teams in the league, yet they often settle for jumpers. This lack of downhill pressure lets opponents steal games when they aren't making their threes. If their shooting holds up through 4 rounds of playoff basketball, it won't be an issue, but that's a big if. If the shots stop dropping, it could be their Achilles heel, but only time will tell, as it's something I'll be watching extremely closely. The second thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs start is how the 76ers signing of Lonnie Walker means only one thing. In part 1 of this video, I mentioned how the 76ers should shut down their season, counting their losses before they make any more. However, the recent buyout signing of Lonnie Walker, for me, makes it very unlikely that they're going to do that now, as for whatever reason, this team believes they can still make serious noise in the postseason. Although, as I also mentioned earlier, I highly disagree, it's now clear that the front office doesn't agree. And on paper, this team should be one of the best, but for whatever reason this season, they just haven't been. The energy is simply not right, and Embiid is saying he's going to need another knee surgery in the off-season, so just let him go and start his treatment now, so he can potentially be ready next season. If Philadelphia push on, risking Embiid's health further, it's going to be a domino effect, with Joel Embiid simply never being ready to start a season. So I still believe they absolutely need to shut it down, and they need to shut it down now. The third reason you need to know before the playoffs begin is who will be the OKC Thunder's clear number 2 guy. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has established himself as a true number 1 option on a championship caliber team. But for the Thunder to take that next step, they need a clear number 2 option. Last season, their playoff downfall wasn't defense. It was the offense that stalled when SGA wasn't creating everything. Oklahoma has worked to improve its offensive flow by turning Isaiah Joe and others into movement shooters, but that's only a marginal fix. The real question is, can Jalen Williams or Chet Holmgren rise to the occasion? Holmgren showed flashes of elite scoring before his injury, averaging 18 points per game by attacking off the catch and hitting mid-range jumpers. While he's still working his way back, his offensive growth will be key for this team once the playoffs arrive. Jalen Williams, on the other hand, played strong defense on Kyrie Irving last postseason, but struggled to score. Now a year older and more experienced, he's refined his offensive game and understands just what it takes to adjust in the playoffs. For OKC to contend, one of these two needs to become a reliable secondary option, and it is a tough ask for these players to step up this early in their careers, but if the Thunder want to reach the mountaintop, one of them simply has to do so. The fourth thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Pacers can put forward a better defensive effort. Last season, the Indiana Pacers made a surprise run to the Eastern Conference Finals, powered by their elite offensive system. Some argue that they only got that far because of the injuries to Milwaukee and New York, but their offensive firepower was undeniable. The real issue? A complete lack of defensive identity, which ultimately led to their downfall. So has anything changed? Not much. At least not yet. Indiana still ranks 22nd in defensive rating, a number that definitely doesn't scream title contender, but they do have the pieces to become better on that end. Miles Turner is a proven shot blocker, All-star Pascal Siakam brings versatility, and Andrew Nembhard has shown flashes of being a strong perimeter defender. The Pacers play an aggressive, high-pressure style, often trapping at half-court. That approach can disrupt older teams and slow down fast-paced offenses, but it's not a reliable coverage to play over a long playoff series. Even with that being said, Indiana won't be an easy matchup, but if they can tighten up defensively while maintaining that high-powered offense led by Tyrese Halliburton, they could make another deep playoff run. Whether they actually do that or not, that is the big question. The fifth thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Rockets' intensity will remain a strength. Houston has been one of the biggest surprises this season, jumping from a lottery team to the 4th seed in the Western Conference. Their turnaround has been fueled by defense, relentless intensity, energy, and a commitment to rebounding. In many ways, they're the complete opposite to the Indiana Pacers, an elite defensive squad that struggles to score. The Rockets are the best rebounding team in the NBA, limiting second chance points and controlling possessions. But their offensive struggles are a real concern. They rank 25th in overall field goal percentage, 28th in three-point percentage, and 28th in two-point percentage. Numbers that very clearly explain why their offense looks stagnant at times. And that weakness caught up to them just before the All-Star break, where they dropped 6 games in a row. When Houston's locked in, they can compete with anyone. But the big question is whether their reliance on energy and intensity will still be an advantage in the playoffs, where every team plays with a heightened urgency. For now, I'm not fully sold on the Rockets as a playoff threat. Their defense gives them a shot, but if they can't find more consistency on offense, their postseason ceiling may be lower than their regular season record suggests. The sixth thing you need to know before the start of the NBA playoffs is what on earth is going on with the Phoenix Suns. At this point, the Suns are basically the Sixers of the West. On paper, they have the talent to be a top 6 seed, yet they're sitting outside of the play-in tournament. Reports surfaced that Phoenix were shopping Kevin Durant at the trade deadline, and understandably, he wasn't thrilled about that. If this season continues to spiral, there's a real chance he forces his way out in the summer. When watching the Suns play, it's not hard to see why the frustration is building. They just don't bring the energy needed to win games consistently. If talent alone won championships, this team would be a contender, but effort, chemistry, and consistency matters just as much, and the Suns simply aren't showing up every night. The Bradley Beal experiment has been a disaster, as he's making $50 million with a no-trade clause and he's coming off the bench. Devin Booker, meanwhile, has been up and down, leaving this team without a clear identity. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder whether Phoenix would have been in a better spot if they didn't trade for Bradley Beal. If they use that $50 million to build a deep, well-balanced roster around Durant and Booker, they're probably in a much better spot right now. Instead, they're stuck with an imbalanced team and no easy way to fix it. So what now? Step 1, play with urgency. If the Suns miss the playoffs, it will be a complete disaster, one that likely costs them Durant in the offseason. It's incredible to think that just 4 years ago, this franchise was in the NBA Finals, looking like a young team on the rise. But now, only one player from that team remains, and they're dangerously close to falling apart. They have to somehow get out of the Bradley Beal business, but with Beal using that no-trade clause, that move remains to be seen. For now, all we can do is watch and wait. The seventh thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is just how good the Dallas Mavericks will be if they can get fully healthy. The Mavericks pulled off one of the most baffling trades in recent memory, sending their franchise guy away for what felt like a bag of chips and Anthony Davis. The basketball gods clearly weren't impressed, as AD didn't even make it through his first full game before getting injured. Now reports suggest that he could miss multiple weeks and possibly up to a month. That leaves Dallas in a really tough spot. The team has barely had a chance to build any chemistry, playing just 3 quarters together before the injuries hit. But in that short time, they looked really good. Davis was at the 4, where he thrives, especially alongside Daniel Gafford at the 5. That front court forces opponents into playing bigger lineups that they might not be comfortable with, giving Dallas an edge. For now, Kyrie Irving is running the show, and he's having a great season. But how good could this team be when fully healthy? That's the big question. With Davis, Derek Lively, and Gafford all out right now, the Mavs are currently playing without any of their bigs, as even making a playoff push is going to be an extreme challenge. If they can get their full roster back in time, Dallas has the potential to be a serious problem in the West. Until then, we're going to be left wondering what could have been. The 8th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to find their offense. After a wild off-season that saw Minnesota trade Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle, the Wolves' offense has been all over the place. Losing Cat meant losing elite floor spacing, and with Randle not nearly being the same kind of shooter, the paint has become a lot more crowded. Pair that with Rudy Gobert at the 5, and suddenly Anthony Edwards has very little space to attack the basket. Even last season, the Wolves weren't exactly an offensive juggernaut, and while their offensive rating sits at 13th this year, it hasn't felt nearly that strong. Even when Randle was out recently, allowing the more reliable shooter Naz Reid to start at the 4, that didn't make much of a difference. Minnesota did win 3 straight games in that stretch, but it was sandwiched between 4 losses, including a tough one to the Bucks missing both Giannis and Damian Lillard. On the bright side, their defense remains a major strength, ranking 6th in the NBA. But if they want to make a deep playoff run, they need to find a more balanced offensive attack. Right now, it's all falling on the shoulders of Anthony Edwards, and that's not a sustainable formula for success. If the Wolves don't get more contributions elsewhere, they might find themselves running out of gas when it matters the most. The 9th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs start is how there's a decision needing to be made in New Orleans. I called the Suns the Sixers of the West, but the Pelicans might have an even stronger case for that title. Just like Philadelphia, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong this season, with virtually every key player missing time due to injury. Coming into the season, I was actually really high on this team, and honestly, if they were healthy right now, I still would be. But that has been the story for this franchise. Talent that can't stay healthy when it matters the most. Zion Williamson remains the heart of that issue. His conditioning has been a constant concern, and his inability to stay healthy has derailed the Pelicans time and time again. The front office recently moved Brandon Ingram to Toronto, which felt like for pennies on the dollar, but that trade in itself doesn't necessarily say much. Many felt Ingram was the odd man out anyway, but it could signal something much larger. It could be the beginning of the end for this core. We've seen glimpses of what this team could be. Just look at last year's playing game against the Lakers. Zion was arguably in the best shape of his career as he cruised to 40 points with ease. Until, of course, the injury bug struck again. At this point, making the playoffs isn't even in the conversation, as the Pelicans have won just 15 games this year. So what happens next? If Zion can put together a massive off-season, show up in peak condition, and actually stay healthy, maybe, just maybe this team could bounce back next year. But that is a massive if. The real question is whether or not the front office believes in this group to give it one more shot, or if they decide that it is time to blow it up. We're just going to have to wait and see. The 10th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Orlando Magic can regain their early season mojo. Orlando was one of the best stories in the NBA to start the season. Paolo Banchero looked like a legitimate superstar, putting up 29 points per game, making it seem like the Magic were finally turning the corner. But just like that, disaster struck. An oblique injury sidelined him for months. Somehow, though, the Magic kept rolling. Franz Wagner stepped up as the team's new number 1 option, and he started averaging 29 points a game, delivering standout performances like his game winner against the Lakers. Just as Orlando fans started to believe, the basketball gods struck again. Wagner suffered the same rare oblique injury and was out for just as long. Now that both have returned, things haven't quite clicked. Banchero in particular hasn't looked like the same guy, as his scoring dipped to just 22 points per game, and instead of a LeBron-Carmelo hybrid that people were calling him to start the season, he's looking more like a Julius Randle now. On top of that, the rest of the team had found ways to win without him, and now there's an awkward transition period as they adjust back to their original roles. As a result, the Magic have slipped to 7th in the East, sitting 2 games below 500. Meanwhile, the Detroit Pistons, yes, Detroit, have jumped them in the standings. But if Orlando can regain that mojo they had earlier in the season, could they actually make some noise in the playoffs? I think so. The East is wide open, and the Magic know it as well as anyone. Their defense makes them a tough matchup, and if Banchero and Wagner can rediscover their best form, they have enough firepower to make it to the second round and maybe push a contender. The Bucks and Knicks have some major question marks that could unlock a pathway for Orlando, and if you want to hear more about that, I cover all of that and more in the first 10 things you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin. So click here to watch that video now.